Hello, students. Welcome back to the literature class. And we were doing a play, The Unexpected, written by Luella Atkins. And I'd already told that this play was written about a century ago. And there were six characters in the play. This is Mrs. Parker, and now we know the first unexpected thing is her name is not Mrs. Parker, it's Mrs. Felton, and her son, though being innocent, was in the prison. We also come to know that two convicts have run away from the prison, and one of them lands up at Mrs. Parker's house. And they're already Alec and Tom, and they too have always been concerned about Mrs. Parker because she was staying alone in a lonely cottage. So, and then the scene ends where I had told on page number 91, where Mrs. Parker takes the convict to the other room to change into normal clothes because he had landed up with the prison clothes at their house. Alec and Tom had not expected such an eventful day at Mrs. Parker's house, and they are really like they're talking amongst themselves that what an extraordinary adventurous day it was. And I'm going to read from the last line of page number 91, where Alec says that although this convict who has run away from the prison would require a lot of luck to move out of Dartmoor because the police men would be on a lookout for them on the roads. And Tom too agrees with it. While they're talking amongst themselves, there is a knock on the door and both of them are alarmed. It might be the warden who has turned up. The warder who looks after the prisoners in the prison. He must have come to he must have come to make inquiries. They are deciding whether to open the door or not. Where Alec says that if they waste time, it would make the warder very suspicious. And he goes and opens the door, but it's not the warder over there, Joe Badger. Again, he comes to their house, to Mrs. Parker's house, and let's read till there. Alec, that poor fellow will need a mighty lot of luck, even now if he is to get away. All roads are sure to be watched. Says police are on a lookout. Tom says it must be a nerve-wracking job. It means, students, extremely tiring on the nerves. To escape from prison, you never know from one moment to the next when someone is going to pounce on you, and a knock on the door on the left. The boy looks at each other in alarm. Students pounce, we know, jump. Here it also means somebody is there to attack. Alec rising. It sounds as though someone has pounced. Tom, yo, wait a bit. Don't go to the door. It may be a warder from the prison. Someone is almost sure to come here to make inquiries. He says someone is going to come and ask a lot of questions, and I'm sure it must be the warder. Alec says, all the same, I must open the door. Delay will only make things look suspicious. Doubtful, suspicious mean. If it's a warder, we'll have to throw him off the scene somehow for Mrs. Parker's sake. Means to avoid, to do something to prevent someone from knowing something, the truth. So it means this, to throw someone off the scene. He opens the door and who comes? Joe Badger. Now, students, Joe Badger has again come in, and now he tells that he felt there was something suspicious going on over here. See, he was already hiding himself somewhere out and looked and was observing the whole scene, the house, what was going on. And he comes in and he asks for Mrs. Parker. He says, I'm going to ask few questions. Now, both of them are very protective about Mrs. Parker, and they say, if you really try to do such a thing, we are going to box your ears. Joe warns them that if you'll do that, you'll land yourself in prison because he says, I know there was something going on suspicious and I saw the convict entering this house. So you please call Mrs. Parker. Now I'm going to read what is that. Alec. She's very busy at the moment. He opens the door, enter Joe. Joe says, where's Mrs. Parker? Alec says, she is very busy at the moment, trying to find a cure for boys who can't mind their own business. Joe, advancing into the room. I'll be taking no rudeness from a kid like you, so just tell Mrs. Parker I want to see her. He says Mrs. Parker is busy trying to find a way to how to keep such people away who are poky into others' matters. So Joe says you just call her, please. Tom, you will be getting a thick ear if you start worrying Mrs. Parker again. Thick ear? Have a swollen ear of being punched. Joe, shall I now? Well, let me tell you, you may find yourself in prison cell before tomorrow. I thought there'd be something suspicious like going on around here, so I just lay low and watched. With an air of triumph, triumph is victory. Well, I saw him come in. So, what have you to say about that? Says, I saw the convict coming in. Now tell me what you have to say about that. And the moment you're caught, you know what you say? Is it? So he's trying to hide the alarm, the surprise. Really, Joe? I haven't the least idea what you're talking about. He says, I don't know what are you talking about. Which convict? What are you talking? Joe, oh, haven't you? Well, maybe you will have when you find yourself arrested for helping a convict to escape. I saw him dart in here. I'll tell you, I'm going to tell all I know. He says, I saw him dart in means move in suddenly and quickly in the this direction. You know, a dart game you play? That. So dart quickly enter this house, he said. And at that very moment, Mrs. Parker enters. It's a stage play, so she's entering the stage. She's entered the Joe with great self-importance. He feels he's really cracked the case. So he says, I just now saw a convict come in here. Are you going to hand him over or must I go for help? He straight away says, are you going to hand over the convict or I just go and call the police? Mrs. Parker, and she's acting innocent. She says, you saw a convict come in here? Why, Joe, have you taken a leave of your senses? If you saw anyone come in just now, it must have been my nephew who arrived from London this morning. Joe mockingly. Oh, him, as owns the sports car. I suppose, well, that may be. Well, I haven't heard that convicts' clothes be fashionable just now in London, Mrs. Parker. Really, Joe? If it were not so utterly ridiculous, I should be angry with you for insulting me. Calling somebody out. Frank, come here a moment, will you? Enter the convict on the right, now wearing ordinary clothes. So when Mrs. Parker enters, Joe says, okay, I just saw the convict and you please, are you handing over the convict or I'll call someone? So Mrs. Parker says, really? Are you out of your senses? She says, have you lost the common, have you lost, or she means to say, have you done something foolish? You know, that's the meaning. That's nothing. There's nobody out here. If you saw anyone come in, just now it has been my nephew. He has come from London. Oh, him, he says, the one who owns that Bentley car. He says, I did not know the people in London wear convicts' clothes as a fashion thing. So he says, okay, I'll call my nephew. She calls and she says, Frank, come in here. So the convict enters. And then indicating to him, this young fellow, Then she says to the convict that this young fellow, that is to Joe, has an idea that the convict has entered into the house. So convict says, "What? That?" And he's acting innocent. He says, "A convict in a house? No, no, young man, I'm sure you have made a mistake. There's no such convict out here." Joe's looking hard. He said, "Oh," says, "is it?" He says, "I saw the convict coming in and I saw him come in wearing the convict clothes." So he says, "Look here, lad, I've just come. You're making false accusations, that is, allegations. If you are making such allegations, you will be in trouble." So I'll read out from here. So, Mrs. Parker to the convict. This young fellow, indicating to Joe, has an idea that he saw a convict enter this house just now. Convict to Joe. What's that? A convict in the house? No, no, young man. I'm quite sure you're making a mistake. Joe, looking hard at the convict. Oh, no, I'm not. You be the man I saw in here a few minutes ago, and you were wearing a convict suit then. Convict. Look here, my lad, if you go about making accusations like that, you'll get yourself into serious trouble. Now, Joe says, "Very well then, if you be Mrs. Parker's nephew and not a convict, you won't have no convict clothes hidden away, will you?" That sounds very logical. Joe, crossing to the right. "Well then, do you mind if I just look in the next room for a moment?" Convict quickly barring his way. "Indeed, I do." "Ah, of course you do. Your convict clothes are in that room." Convict. "Now, look here. I stood about enough of this nonsense. I think we'll all be well pleased if you kindly get out of the house." Joe crossing left to center. "All right, I'm going, but mind you, I have my bike outside. I'm going straight to my uncle. I'm going to tell him all that I've seen here. He'll soon send out a description of that cars of yours, and you'll find you won't get away so easily after all." Tom coming from the left. "You're going to do no such thing." Joe. "Oh, and who's going to stop me?" Tom taking off his clothes. "I am. You may be a bit bigger than I am, but I could down you any day by the time I'm done with you. It will be a doctor that you need, not a constable." So here, scene is becoming very tensed. So Joe says, "Very well, if you are Mrs. Parker's nephew, then and you've come from London, then you will be having no convict clothes, is it?" Convict says, "It's very logical of her that." Then he says, "Okay, then let me see in the other room whether there are any convict clothes or not." So the convict says, bars the way, he stops the way, he says, "No, but I would not like you to go inside and see." So Joe says, "Of course, then it means that you have the convict clothes." Convict says, "Now look, I have had enough of it. You please leave and go." So Joe says, "Okay, if I go, I'll be informing the police and I'll give the description of the car. You won't even go far enough and they'll catch hold of you." So Tom and Lily both are worried. So Tom says, "You're not going to do any such thing." Joe says, "Who's going to stop me?" And so Tom takes off his coat and he says, "You might be a little bigger than me, but I could bring you down. I can give you a good punch. I can fight you down anytime, and you would not require now a constable because I will hit you so hard, you'll require a doctor." Joe rushes at Tom and Joe rushes towards Tom, but Tom skillfully avoids it. As the scene becomes tensed, Mrs. Parker says, "Tom, Joe, you're not going to do any such thing." And in midst of this disturbance, there's another knock on the door and everybody's silent. Now what? Silent anxiety means a feeling of worry. Everybody's silent. Now who's come? Now Joe's holding a handkerchief on his face, mouth as if to show he's been hurt. Mrs. Parker to the convict, "Quick, You will have to get out of the way back. Knock repeated, this time more loudly. So I'm going to read that thing. So, in the midst of the disturbance, a loud knock is heard on the door on the left. The boys stop fighting, and there are a few moments of silent anxiety. The knock is repeated. Joe holding a handkerchief to his face as the hurt. Now you'd better open that door if you dare. Mrs. Parker to the convict. Quick! You will have to get out of the back way. Knock repeated, this time more loudly. Convict. Too late, there's no time for that. Joe opens the door, enters the warder on the left. Tom and Alec look at alarm in each other and at the warder. Mrs. Parker clings to the convict as though the strain is almost too much for her. Warder, looking about the room suspiciously. Excuse me, I don't want to interrupt the excitement, but we are looking for the escaped convict. Two men got away in the mist this afternoon. Fortunately, one has already been caught, but we are still looking for the other man. Have you, by any chance, noticed any stranger about here? Joe, you need look no further, pointing to the convict. There be the man you've been searching for. Warder, crossing from the left to the center. Ah, I thought I'd recognize him. Mrs. Parker, clinging to the convict. No, no, it's all a mistake, I tell you. Joe, I saw him sneak in here about 10 minutes ago, and if you want a proof, his prison clothes be in the next room. I was just going to fetch my uncle, the constable of the village, and these boys tried to stop me. That's why we are fighting. We were fighting when you came in, warder. Indeed. This is a smart bit of work, my lad. Your uncle should be proud of you, produces handcuffs and goes towards the convict. So students, now when the knock is repeated, Mrs. Parker says to the convict, you please run away. But the convict says it's now too late. Joe opens the door and now the warder comes in. And they are all in alarm and wonder what would happen next. And this scene is too much to bear for Mrs. Parker. She clings to the convict as if she's about to fall. Noted students, she's completely shocked when she sees the warder. Warder looks around suspiciously. He says, we are on a lookout of a convict and we saw him coming this way. He is escaped in the mists. So one of them is caught and we're looking for the other. And Joe wants to show off. He says, he points to the convict and he says, he's the one you've been searching for. And then the warder comes to him and says, I've recognized him. Mrs. Parker is clinging to the convict. No, I'll tell you, I'll explain. But Joe says, I saw this. Joe wants to show that it is he who solved the mystery. He says, actually, I saw the convict enter this house 10 minutes ago and I wanted the proof of the clothes, and the clothes are in the next room, but they're not letting me take. And my uncle is a constable. And I was going to go and tell him, but these two boys tried to stop me. He's trying to tell everything, and the warder says, yes, it's smart work, lad. Lad means a boy here. And he takes out the handcuffs and goes to the convict. Mrs. Parker is almost in tears. She says, oh, wait, please, don't take him. Convict trying to console. Shh, it's no use. The game's up now. The convict is saying, no use, mom crying. The game is up. But students, the title is unexpected and the unexpected is yet to come. So let's keep reading. It's a big suspense. The warder handcuffs the convict. I'll have to take you back at once. And to Mrs. Parker, I'm sorry, lady, but I'm afraid there's going to be trouble for you over this. Did you know that this man was a convict when he entered this house? Joe promptly, of course she did. She had a sports car hidden in the shed already to get him away. And what more, she must have had those clothes waiting for him. Tom to Joe. Wait till I get outside tonight. Warder sharply to Tom. That's enough of that, my lad. This boy is simply doing his duty to Joe. Just keep an eye on this fellow for a moment. I'm going to have a look for those prison clothes. Mrs. Parker, but please, won't you just let me explain? You see, exit the warder to the right, followed by Mrs. Parker. Now, students, uh, the convict is about to handcuff the the warder is about to handcuff the convict, and then he tells Mrs. Parker. Warder says to Mrs. Parker, "Did you know that he was already a convict?" Before she could answer, again Joe says, "Yes, she knew, and she already had a sports car hidden, and she had the suit ready." She's telling everything so that wants to show that he knows everything about the case. And this says this is going to be bad. And then Tom says, "Wait, come outside, I'm going to show." He's giving a threatening, he's just kind of saying, "Wait out, we'll meet outside and I'm going to tell you." The warder says, "That's enough, boy." And the warder tells these two boys that he was already doing his duty. And then he tells Joe, "Just have an eye on the convict. Let me go to the other room and get the convict clothes." So he goes and he's followed by Mrs. Parker. So two people, one is gone off the stage. One is the convict, the warder, and it is followed by Mrs. Parker. Now, now let's see. Tom slowly approaching Joe. "I'm going to hit you so hard that you won't know what's happened until you wake up in the hospital next week." Joe nervously backing up. "Stop that. You daren't touch me. I be doing my duty, and if you're not careful, you will be getting locked up yourself for this." "Alec, listen, you are not doing your duty. You're sending an innocent man back to prison. That's what you are doing." Re-enter warder with the convict clothes and a parcel, followed by Mrs. Parker. Warder to Joe. "You're quite right, my lad. Here are the prison clothes, and I found this parcel of provisions, which was unmistakably prepared for a long journey." To Mrs. Parker. "I'm sorry, lady, but this is going to be a very serious for you. You were obviously you were obviously helping this man to escape, and it's my duty to report the matter." Alec, "Oh, I say, officer, must you do that?" "What, I'm sorry, but duty is duty, you know." Mrs. Parker wearily, tired. "Oh, it doesn't matter. If my boy goes to the prison, they can do as they like with me." Warder to the convict. "Come along, my man. We'll be getting back, and I may say as well, take those clothes with us." Crossing to the left with the convict. "Oh, and by the way, I don't think it would be a bad idea if I took you back in that sports car the lady has outside. That car is an important piece of evidence, and I don't want anyone to tamper with it." Mrs. Parker sits down to the left of the table, crying bitterly. "I have my bike outside," Joe says. "So I think I'd ride up to the prison after you. Maybe I could see the governor and tell him just what happened this evening. Seeing as I want to get into the force, maybe, well, what I mean is that it might help." Warder, at the door on the left. "It's a good idea, but I don't think you'd better ride tonight. All roads are guarded, and you might have trouble to pass." Thoughtfully. "Of course, I could give you the password, but that's against the regulation." Joe proudly. "That's all right, officer. I already know the password. Regent is the word, I believe." Warder, startled. "Yes, that's right. But how did you know?" Joe, "Ah, You forgot that my uncle be constable in the village. He told me the word, although it's against the regulations, you see. He knows it's safe with me. I'm not the one to get out any secrets. Warder, no, my lad, I'm sure of that. You've done me a very good turn this evening, and someday I'm sure you'll be a great man in the force yourself. Good night. So, then what happens is when Tom says, I'm going to hit Joe very hard because what you've done is wrong. But Joe says, I was doing my duty. Alex says, you were not doing your duty, you were sending an innocent man to the prison. While they're talking these things, while they're talking amongst themselves, the warder and Mrs. Parker enter, and warder tells Joe that you were right. The prison clothes were there in that room, and there was also a parcel of provisions, that is, things necessary, the necessary things, food and necessary things. So he says, see, all things were there, and then the warder tells Mrs. Parker, you are in for serious trouble because you were there helping this man to escape. So, Alec, OIC officer, must you do that? Do you have to send her? That will she also land up in trouble? So Warder says, sorry, but I'm doing my duty. Mrs. Parker says, okay, whatever happens to me, it's fine because now my son is going to the prison. It's okay with me also now. It doesn't matter to me. Then Warder to the convict, come along, man, I should take you. And then he says, it would be a very good idea if I take you in that Bentley car as a piece of evidence which Mrs. Parker had bought to help you escape. And at this moment, Mrs. Parker's crying bitterly. Joe says, come, I'll also come along, I have my bike. The warder says, it's not a good idea because there's police on the lookout on the roads and you will find it difficult to move out. And I could help you telling the password, but that's against the rule. And again, Alec to show off, he says, oh, the password. I know the password, and the password is Regent. Market students is a very important line. He says, I know the password, and the password is Regent. And when the warder hears it, he's startled, he's surprised. He says, how did you know? Because he's not in the police. He says, Joe says, oh, I told you already, my uncle is as a constable. He told me the password, although I do not say such things. But I never leak out such secrets. It's against the rules. Warder says, no, yes, you should not otherwise. He says, but I know one day you're going to be a very, I know that you will be a great man in the force. And he says, good night. And the warder and the convict leave. Joe exultantly, very happy, triumphantly says, well, and he's telling to this, I told you I'll catch one of the convicts, and I did, didn't I? And I'm a very good detective, he says. And you are calling me gas bag and this. Well, I've shown it to you all, he says. I've proved it all. Alex says, please, now you leave. And Torment says, he's not going yet. I'm going to thrash him for this. If he says, doesn't go, I'm going to thrash him. I'm going to beat him. Joe exit. Mrs. Parker lowering her handkerchief, and Tom, please don't fight again tonight. She's saying, don't fight, and she's crying. And Alec and Tom stand awkwardly. They do not know what to do. And then there's a sound of the car, and the car goes. Mrs. Parker listens. She says, the car goes. Alec is still upset. He says, Mrs. Parker I would have cried. I feel like crying. Mrs. Parker suddenly, she dries up her tears and she says, shh, listen boys, I have to tell you something. They have not taken my boy again. You're the unexpected, she says, you've not taken my boy, she says. And they say, what? What? Both of them say, what? Just this, the convict you saw just now is not Roger. She says, this convict you just now saw go and you've been thinking is my son, is not my son. And she says, I've never seen him before in my life. But he said he called you mother. She said he called me mother after you said that you are going to help my son escape. He assumed things, he understood, therefore he called me mother. in the hope that I would not tell the truth. And at that moment, I did not feel, because I felt, I thought about Roger, and my heart didn't allow me to turn this fellow away. So disbelieving, he says, then your son didn't escape after all. Then he says, your son did not escape from the prison. Mrs. Parker crosses to the left and she says, as if in a whisper, it's on the stage, not being overheard. She says, yes, boys, Roger did escape. That's just what I am making, that's what making me so marvelously happy. She's very happy. She says, Roger did escape. You see, he was the warder who's just now arrested this pal. This warder was actually her son, who came dressed up as a warder. And they have gone away, gone off in the Bentley car. And Tom is in enthusiasm. What you mean? And then I'm going to read from there. Mrs. Parker lowering the handkerchief from her face. Tom, please don't fight again tonight. It's no use, she cries. Alec standing awkwardly above Mrs. Parker's chair as though not knowing how to comfort her. Mrs. Parker, I can't tell you how sorry we are about this. Crossing from left to the center. There's nothing too bad for that sneak Joe after this. Sound of the car. Listen, there goes the car. Alec, I could have howled like a kid when they took your boy away. Mrs. Parker suddenly drying up her ears. Hush, listen, boys. I've something to tell you in a strange in the stage whisper. They've not taken my boy away. Puzzled. What? You mean? Now perfectly calm. Just this, the convict you saw just now was not Roger. Tom, not Roger? You mean he was not your son? Mrs. Parker. I've never seen him before in my life. Alec, but he called you mother. Mrs. Parker, I know after you called him that you were willing to help my son escape. He called me mother in hope that I should not tell the truth. And I will thought of Roger, and I just hadn't the heart to turn against the poor fellow. Disbelieving. Then your son didn't escape after all. Mrs. Parker rises, crosses to the left, and makes sure they are not overheard. Coming to the center. Yes, boys, Roger did escape. That's just what's making me so marvelously happy. You see, he saw the warder who just now arrested his pal and took him off to freedom in the Bentley. Tom in great enthusiasm. What? You mean? Mrs. Parker, hush. Not so loudly. Yes, Roger explained everything to me while we had that minute together in the next room. He was hiding behind the boulder when a warder who had separated from the others came quite close to him by springing on the man and using a little wrestling trick he had learned in his school days. Roger managed to overcome the warder, and then he effected a change of clothes. He immediately made for his cottage, but he very soon realized the situation where Master Joe was concerned. Laughing, it was a splendid idea of Roger to take away the Bentley as the evidence. Coming down, then by this time they are well on the way to freedom. But I say, won't it be awkward if they're stopped on the road? Mrs. Parker, why? That's just the cream of the joke, Joe. Never blabs any of his uncle's secret, but he told Roger the one thing he needed to know. He told him the password that will get him safely to freedom. Now, all I have to do is join him, and we are going to Australia to start all over again. Alec gripping his hands. Mrs. Parker, I can't tell you how glad I am about this. Mrs. Parker, and I can't tell you how grateful I am to you boys. Well, I say, you are crying, aren't you? There's nothing to cry about now. Mrs. Parker, wiping her ears. I know, but I'm just crying for happiness. Well, I'm bold. But there's, as my dad says, where women are concerned, the unexpected always happens. So you see, the unexpected thing was, she says that her son Roger had dressed up as a warder and had taken the Bentley car away to freedom. And then she explains, Roger explained everything, when the moment he goes as a warder dressed to the other room to take the prison clothes. That time he tells Mrs. Parker that while he was coming, he was hiding behind a boulder, big rock. When one of the warders had separated from the troop and was coming in his direction, he fought him and then took his clothes, and then he landed up at his place. And what happened was that as a piece of evidence, he took the Bentley car also. But then Alex says, won't it be they will be stopped in the road? Then she says the icing on the cake is that Joe himself told the password. That was Regent, which will help them to escape. And now they are going to Australia and she will also join them together. All of them are happy. She thanks them for being such a good help. So wasn't it a lovely story? The unexpected, isn't it? Now students, let's discuss the question answers, isn't it? Then what news is bought by Tom and Alec? The news bought in Tom and Alec was that there were two convicts who had escaped from the prison. And how does Mrs. Parker react to it? She's frightened, she's first startled, and she gives a look of being frightened. Alarmed, actually, she is very much alarmed. She's motionless at that time. Then, who is Joe Badger? Joe Badger, his uncle is a constable, and he also aims to be a constable, and he's trying his luck in this case, so that this case would give him an opportunity to join the force. So the next is give few examples from the conversation between Joe, Alec and Tom to show that Joe is not liked. One of such example is where he says, where Alec calls him a gas bag. Then Tom says, be careful, I'm going to knock you off. Then at one place he says, again they threaten him, tell him to leave the house. So all these instances that tell that he is not liked. The next is, why did Joe suspect Mrs. Parker? Yes, he suspected Mrs. Parker because she was living on a deserted moor, on a lonely house. She did not entertain people. Why was she living so close near to the prison? And why she had a Bentley car hidden in the shed. And the next one was, what is Mrs. Parker's real identity? What is her plan? Mrs. Parker's real identity is that she is Mrs. Felton, and her plan is to help her son escape from the prison. Then the next question is, how does Joe's foolishness help the criminals to escape? Obviously, he tells the word regent, and that helps them to escape. The main password, he gives it to them. And though the answers would be given to you in the Google Sheet, I'm quickly discussing it with you all. How does, the next is, which instance in the play shows that Mrs. Parker is a very kind human being? Oh, she's a very kind human being because she's concerned about Tom. She's worried that it's misty, there's a lot of fog, they should go back home in time, otherwise the mother would be worried. So this shows she was a kind lady. And comes the last question out here. Where women are concerned, the unexpected always happens. It's used thrice in the play. What are the three situations concerned? So students, the three situations concerned are when Tom and Alec, they feel that the first is when she hears about the convict, they have escaped from the prison. She looks nervous. Although she's staying on the moors alone, and she's never been afraid, and suddenly when she hears two convicts have escaped, she's nervous. She looks frightened as a rabbit. The next is she had the nerve to plan the escape, and now she fainted when she saw the convict. And the last time is they says when Tom says fancy Mrs. Parker having the nerve to plan all this and fainting at the last moment, and the last when she has tears in her eyes, and those are the tears of happiness. That's the last time when Tom says, where women are concerned, the unexpected always happens. And this was a wonderful story, students, the unexpected. Thank you so much for watching the video. Thank you all.